8 years ago, in 2012, we set out to infiltrate the abandoned Runwell Hospital complex after battling our way through acres of field, mud, ditch and hedgerow, all whilst remaining undetected. Armed with only a dodgy camcorder and our once quite awful camera skills, which we've since thankfully left in the past, we were determined to make it to this fascinating and rather eerie piece of England's dark medical history.
There's that fence which guards most of the perimeter. So now we've got to work out how we can actually have a look at this historical site.
After several hours of hiking, we finally reached the site perimeter. This adventure is what I would describe as possibly our first infiltration-style mission. The hospital closed in mid-2010, so had not long been derelict, yet its demolition was already well underway, and we would have to evade both construction personnel and security. This was our first glimpse of the gutted 1930s asylum. I vividly remember the tension at this point was almost unbearable, with every step feeling like one too many. Guard dog signs pinned to the boarded up wards were not encouraging. In only 2 years of abandonment, the site had already become severely overgrown, with brambles filling once trimmed lawns and moss bleeding out across concrete pathways. The dated signage emphasised the site's obsolescence, almost as dated as how our bulky compact camera looks by today's standards.
Like many other people don't photograph it, then you know, that's it, the whole history of the place is lost. It's gotta be quiet. This is proper stealth. We don't know of any guards on site, but there may be the odd one. As long as you look before you act, then you're gonna be safe, you know.
Whilst these blocks at the site's southwestern end had smashed upper windows, we struggled to find any ground level entrances that weren't either boarded up or locked. Still, we kept looking.
Man, this is scary. Fence is only there, so if we have to just run through it, we can.
We kept the direction of the fence in the back of our minds at all times. When you have to run, you can't stop to think where you're going. We were coming onto a road leading this western section back to the centre of the site. Whilst it was a direct route, it also meant that we were in visibility of the potentially lively part of the building site at the opposite end.
We've gone through the bushes there, but there's no way in. It was all boarded up.
We soon got our first glimpse of the central complex, with the Art Deco water tower and boiler house emerging in the distance amongst the bushes. The impressive structure was difficult to miss.
It's architectural. Some outdoor toilet or something.
Even that road goes. Go on. It'd be great for paintballing or somewhere. If it was open. Yeah.
So far it seems to be fairly secured along the middle, but we should be able to see some more of the site anyway. Joe, yeah, I think we should try over the fence if we do see. And this
Undeterred by warning signs, we continue to creep into the more central part of the Runwell Hospital complex.
if you got the map, that's the main entrance there. Maybe that way's better.
Chain link fences and lampposts sprouting through the foliage were sometimes the only reminder this was once an elaborate community of its own, with facilities and accommodation connected by a complex network of roads, almost a ghost town. Again, more windows were shuttered off. A huge unclimbable mesh fence sectioned off parts of the site. We believe this was erected to isolate high-risk patients with more severe mental states, liable to escape into the surrounding area or cause trouble. An old picnic table rotted behind one of these fences, denied from the outside.
Main entrance.
We caught our first glimpse of the iconic admin block clock tower in green copper verdigris. We would take a closer look later.
Come back. Shall I? Be careful. This is near that's the main entrance.
fucking dwarf walk.
Yeah, but it looks really dodgy. There's a bit there, isn't there? It's alright.
Loads of vans over there.
No, we can... Where to?
Right back down.
Yeah. They're in there. Quick, go. Fast. Go.
Quicken that up. Seems like everyone is pretty well.
Yeah.
Let's say we are passionate for history.
Yeah.
Sneaking around the site for some time, it seemed there may not be a way in. Amongst the walls of decay, clues to the human story behind the hospital's facade could be found. While some patients were fenced away, others were allowed to roam the vast grounds of this complex, once nestled in the Essex countryside. Facilities varied from workshops to farms, kitchen gardens to a laundry and a chapel. Despite the conditions of its residents' occupancy, a sense of community which once coloured these ruins still shone through. As we shortly discovered, its recent occupants of guards and contractors had too been keeping themselves busy.
I take pictures.
Blimey. Wonder what they got up to in this place. The builders like a bit of that, I'm guessing. Looks like this is a good bit. Keep down. Oh, is it?
The builders love that one.
Yeah.
This building, the Lodge, is the only surviving structure today to still be used by the NHS. The buildings all looked similar, yet also different. While some were built more recently, most were constructed throughout the 1930s and featured the signature cream colour scheme with light blue details. Whilst we're not sure if this was original, definitely kept with the original aesthetic of the hospital.
Police tape.
Despite the expansiveness of the site, it was easy to see how it had become obsolete by the standards of modern welfare.
There's the water tower.
vents from underground, utility tunnels, maybe.
Whilst trying to quietly creep to the next part of the site, my old brick phone decided to ring on full volume.
That fence was moving in and out. Someone was trying to bust it.
Should we just cut across?
Okay.
We edged our way nearer and nearer to the site's centre, including the water tower. This was built in a classic Art Deco geometric style with minimal decoration. In its day, its simplicity would have been unlike any traditional architecture that came before, and its huge height would have emerged from the horizon as an elegant landmark of modernity. In demolition plans for the site, the water tower and boiler house feature heavily as a cultural heritage asset, and it's speculated to have had a listed status. Whilst the tower and boiler house was painstakingly avoided in the initial wave of demolition, tragically it was eventually torn down anyway, despite promises to incorporate it into the new housing estate. Why and how this happened is unclear. Perhaps it was considered too ugly to be an architectural asset by the casual observer. Regardless, it seems a heritage crime was sadly committed due to negligence, or the message being lost somewhere along the line. The proud tower will sorely be missed for years to come by many, and only the hospital's more traditionally romantic clock tower in chapel survive today as a reminder of the site's vivid history. In the epicentre of the site's demolition works, we had to watch at every corner. Across this area of cleared land lay the main complex, and this was torn wide open. However, after noticing several active vehicles on the other side which luckily didn't notice us, we decided to stick to the inactive side of the site. One thing you realise after having been to many abandoned places is how quickly nature reclaims its lost territory. As soon as humans leave and maintenance and regular use stops, structures fall to the mercy of the weather and temperature. Natural forces crack and break their way inside, and surfaces become discoloured and tarnished. When places are discarded, and many humans attempt and often fail to gain access, nature finds its way in anyway. despite the tension which hung over us on the explore. That didn't mean that the absurdity of places like this doesn't give rise to some quite humorous and sometimes downright bizarre situations.
Play equipment. Take it they didn't want that. These cool gloves to do. 2 fingers missing and a thumb, so you can get good. I think we better get.
I reckon that says hurry up. Not bad so far. I mean, we haven't been caught or anything, and we've got pictures. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to get in. We're now going to head back by going around the perimeter.
There might be more stuff behind it.
After hours of exploring the eerie site, it became clear that the non-demolished end was not going to be accessible. Considering it was abandoned officially only 2 years prior, it's quite surprising watching this footage back to see how overgrown it had become. Perhaps some of these older buildings were phased out before closure gradually, as they became increasingly unusable. It's been great to have a look back at some of our older footage, which has become now history of its own.
Got to walk through all those fields, this final building here, and then we go.
We finished the adventure by looking at this outdoor shelter.
Looks like the thing that shoot at you a bit there. What are you doing? Having a look around it.
Perhaps it once looked out onto the sports fields, or the promised land of idyllic Essex countryside which lay beyond reach for those souls inside. Runwell Hospital survives in the footage, photographs and memories of those that lived, visited and explored the 1930s estate.